Greetings everyone, welcome back to another lesson on Bite-Size History with Audrey D. Now in today's lesson, we are going to be looking at Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. So we are going to be getting a twofer in there today for two key figures from ancient Egypt. And the reason why they are going to go in the same episode is because they are father and son. We're going to be looking at each of their reigns as well as how they contributed to ancient Egypt in this lesson. But first, please make sure that you are hitting that like and subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I put out a new lesson. Also, find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Patreon as History with Audrey D, where I do my best to put up some new content about the lessons that we are going over. All right, let's go ahead and get started on Akhenaten and Tutankhamun and how their reigns changed Egyptian history. But first, let's again go ahead and take a quick look at our learning goal and our learning standards for today's lesson. Now, our standard for today is going to be, again, standard 2, which is to describe the emergence of early civilizations. Now, our learning goal for today, however, is going to be determine the contributions of key figures from ancient Egypt. And like I said, for our learning target, we're going to be identifying the contributions of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun in today's lesson as well. Key questions that we are going to be focusing on are: who were Akhenaten and Tutankhamun? When did they reign? What were their accomplishments? And what did they contribute to Egyptian culture and society? Let's go ahead and start out with Akhenaten, his life and when he reigned, so we can better understand how he led to Tutankhamun's reign. Two well-known leaders from ancient Egypt are Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, also known as King Tut. This father and son duo shifted religion during their reigns, both with different goals in mind. Let's start out by looking at Akhenaten, who was the son of Amenhotep III and was originally named Amenhotep IV. He was married to Queen Nefertiti and father to Tutankhamun, as well as Tutankhamun's future wife, Akhenaten. The children did not share the same mother, however. Tutankhamun was the son of Lady Kaya, who was a lesser wife to Akhenaten, while Akhenaten was the daughter of Queen Nefertiti. Akhenaten began his reign as Amenhotep IV, which lasted for 5 years before he shifted from the policies and traditional religious practices of Egypt and his father, and changed his devotion to following Aten. The cult of Aten would become the dominant religion for the next 12 years. Akhenaten means spirit of Aten or Aten, depending on the spelling. Akhenaten would become known as the Heretic King because of this major religious shift. He abolished the traditional religious practices of Egypt and instituted the first known monotheistic state religion, not only in Egypt but also in the world. His reign lasted from 1353 to 1336, during which he moved the capital of Egypt from Thebes to a city he founded, which became known as Amarna. The part of Egyptian history is known as the Amarna period. This part of Egyptian history is known as the Amarna period and is considered the most controversial era of Egyptian history. Due to his religious reforms, Akhenaten became despised by many as a heretic, while others admired him for being a champion of monotheism. Aten, or Atan, is represented as the solar or sun disk and is displayed in many inscriptions from this era. The Aten was one of the many cults or religious groups in ancient Egypt and was believed to be a sun god. Cults were not negative at this point in history, so please remember that as we discuss the Egyptian cults. All practices for these different cults actually wanted eternal harmony and balance. The cult of Amun was the dominant cult during the reign of Amenhotep III and had grown so much in power that they rivaled the royal family in both influence and wealth. By the reign of Amenhotep IV, more land was owned by the cult of Amun than by the pharaoh himself. Along with adopting the new name of Akhenaten instead of Amenhotep IV, he also proclaimed himself to be the living incarnation of Aten, the one all-powerful deity, and by his 9th year in power, Akhenaten also closed all other temples and continued the decree to abolish and outlaw the old Egyptian religion, further suppressing the practice of these old religions, and thus forcing Egypt into practicing a monotheistic religion and embedding his name as the Heretic King. This new life of religious persecution was previously unknown to Egyptians, and while their gods were banned, Atenism was kept within the royal family and excluded all others. This practice of monotheism is believed to have begun 700 years before Isaiah of the Bible and the Abrahamic religions. The policies that went along with this new religion did not favor or help the people of Egypt. Akhenaten further destroyed the practice of polytheism by having the names of the old gods removed from monuments and temples throughout Egypt. These names were chiseled off and in some cases aggressively removed through brutal hacking of the walls and tombs of temples. Before monotheism, the pharaoh would be linked to or identified with a specific god such as Horus. However, Akhenaten chose to identify as an actual god incarnate, aka the god. It is believed that due to Akhenaten believing himself to be an actual god, he no longer pursued the duties of the pharaoh, such as military campaigns and foreign policy. The temples he closed were part of the political and economic systems of Egypt as well. Through his neglect, Akhenaten essentially ignored what happened outside of his palace at Akhetaten, and more so, what fell beyond the borders of Egypt as a whole. Egypt had maintained prosperity and grown more powerful since before the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, whom we covered in a previous lesson, as she, her predecessors, and those who followed her reign until Amenhotep IV completed building projects, established military campaigns, and created treaties with bordering countries to gain allies. Evidence of his neglect came from the over 50 letters sent to Akhenaten from the king of Byblos asking for assistance to fight off Abdiashirta of Amur. Not one of those letters was answered by Akhenaten, and therefore Egypt lost its ally. Other rulers, such as Tushratta, the king of Mitanni, also claimed a loss of respect as an ally, as Akhenaten reportedly sent inferior statues that were gold-plated instead of the solid gold statues sent by his father, Amenhotep III. In the Amarna letters, we learn that Akhenaten was only diplomatic when it suited him, and he stood a chance to directly benefit. After the taking of Byblos and killing of Ribadi, Akhenaten chose to rebuke Abdiashirta for his actions and for being friends with the Hittites. While this shows him taking some interest in state affairs, his lack of response in so many others seems to show that he would pick and choose his involvement. Abdiashirta was imprisoned in Egypt for 1 year until Hittite forces began to advance on northern Egypt, and he was released in order to get them to leave. Now that we have a bit better understanding of his reign, let's take a look at Akhenaten's accomplishments and his contributions to ancient Egyptian society and culture. Much of what we've learned so far in this lesson demonstrates the impact Akhenaten had on Egyptian culture and society. Let's take a look at what else he accomplished during his reign. The building projects of Akhenaten were also seen as predominantly self-serving. Akhenaten commissioned a series of boundary stelae to be carved into the cliffs surrounding Akhenaten, and that if he were to die outside of this city, his body should be brought back home and buried in his tomb in the eastern cliffs. Before taking his new name, however, Amenhotep IV did carry out several building projects in Nubia, built temples to the Aten in Memphis and Heliopolis, and his primary focus, however, was always on Akhenaten. The artwork that was created is also known as Amarna art. It is represented in this stele carved in the cliffs surrounding the city of Akhenaten. During their reign, Akhenaten and Nefertiti would ride their chariots from one end of Akhenaten to the other, in order to mirror the movement of the sun across the sky. This procession is also represented to us in ancient art and written texts from this period. This act also represented that Akhenaten and Nefertiti were seen as or saw themselves as gods and were the only ones who Aten could be worshipped through. The artwork from this period also shows everyone in the royal family to have spindly or pencil-thin appendages, as well as abnormally long necks, most likely because the arms and hands of Aten were represented as rays from the sun, stretching down from the heavens and touching those on earth. The stele that we're presently looking at is a famous stele portraying the royal family seated together with the rays of Aten streaming down to touch them. The intimate nature of the images depicted in Amarna artwork also sets it apart from other periods. It shows the private moments of the royal family, whereas depictions of pharaohs both before and after this era show the pharaoh alone, usually hunting or in battle, sometimes standing with a god or his queen in a proper position. The primary contribution Akhenaten made to Egyptian society was creation of monotheism, with his belief in Aten to be the one supreme being of love, power, and creation. This monotheistic religion forever shaped not only Egypt, but potentially the rest of the world as well. It is also believed by some that the biblical character of Moses was one of the original followers of Aten, who was banished from Egypt after Akhenaten's reign ended, and with it, monotheism. Well, we've learned about the father, let's learn about the son. Like I said, we've discussed the father, now let's take a look at the son, King Tut. As we know him today, however, he was known by two different names during his lifetime. His birth name was Tutankhaten, given to him during the reign of his father Akhenaten, when Aten was the only god allowed to be worshipped in Egypt. The name Tutankhamun, also spelled Amon or Amen at the end, was the name chosen by King Tut when he ascended to the throne after the death of Smenkhare, who may have been co-regent with Akhenaten during the final years of his reign. Tutankhamun was married to his half-sister Akhenaten, who would later change her name to Akhenamun, but not the one from the mummy. King Tutankhamun's reign was brief, lasting only 9 years, from 1333 to 1323 BCE. However, during this time, he managed to accomplish a few key objectives for Egypt. Tutankhamun relied on the advice of priests and officials due to his young age in order to rule Egypt. Two of these officials were Ai and Horemheb, who were also chief advisors to Akhenaten. Both of these advisors would eventually be successors to the throne after the death of King Tutankhamun, Ai being first, followed by Horemheb. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at the accomplishments of Tutankhamun, as well as how he impacted Egyptian culture and society. Some of the achievements of Tutankhamun include his reinstatement of the religious worship of all Egyptian gods, thus bringing back polytheism. These practices had been banned during the reign of his father Akhenaten. By the third year of his reign, Tut left the city of Akhenaten and moved the capital and his home to Memphis. This is when he officially changed his name to Tutankhamun from Tutankhaten. He decreed the restoration of all temples, personnel, images, and privileges of the old gods. Tutankhamun also saw his father as the heretic king. He also began the process of restoring the sacred shrines of Amun, which his father had ordered to be defaced. Building projects completed by Tutankhamun included a palace built at Karnak, a memorial temple in western Thebes, and the colonnade of the Temple of Luxor, that he decorated with reliefs showing the Opet festival, which was an annual rite of renewal involving the king, the three chief deities of Karnak, which were Amun, Mut, and Khons, as well as the form of Amun at Luxor. King Tut died at the age of 19, possibly due to malaria and a degenerative bone disease. After his death, his successors chose to obliterate his and his father's names from history. All Aten monuments and temples were destroyed, and the names of Akhenaten and his immediate family were removed from tombs, monuments, and temples. I created a history placing himself as the successor to Amenhotep III, thereby erasing the reigns of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun from Egyptian history. This is actually one last reason King Tut was and is so important to ancient Egyptian history. Tut is most well known for his tomb, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922. Because Tut's name had been erased, his tomb was one of very few that did not get discovered and looted by tomb robbers. A fully intact tomb was a massive discovery and is where we get much of our knowledge about funerary rites and other practices of ancient Egyptians. Inside Tut's tomb, they found his mummy encased in 3 nested coffins, with the innermost coffin being made of solid gold, while the 2 outer coffins had hammered gold encasing their wooden frames. In the other chambers of the tomb, Egyptologists found chariots, weapons, furniture, clothing, statues, staffs, and many other items. Because of this discovery, more people know who King Tut is than most other pharaohs. Although he did not accomplish as much in his life, what we have learned from his tomb about ancient Egypt is his true legacy. All right, well, as you can see, there are a number of different details to the lives of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, and that wraps it up for our lesson today. Now, I hope you enjoyed this lesson and learning how each one of these rulers impacted Egyptian culture and society, and how they still have an impact on us today. If you did enjoy this episode, please make sure that you're hitting that like and subscribe button. Also, find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Patreon so you can support this channel as well by giving me a follow on those. If you have any questions, please make sure that you are dropping those into the comment section below, and I will do my best to answer them as soon as I can. If there are any key figures from ancient Egyptian history or history in general that you would like me to cover in a future lesson, let me know those in the comment section below as well, and I would do my best to get to them as soon as possible. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you in our next lesson.